Oh. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending the meeting of the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. I'm the chairman, Ken Yeager, and I'm delighted to be here. Before we go into the first order of business on our agenda today, the approval of the minutes, I do have a couple of brief comments I'd like to make. He's not here today, but I wanted to express my appreciation to our vice chairman, Kevin Brooks, and I hope the minutes will show that, for filling in for me at the last meeting. I was just not able to attend. And I also wanted to take the liberty of expressing my appreciation to Jill Holland and Tom Bickers for the service they have rendered to this board, or this commission. I wasn't here when we honored them last month, but they were both very, very good members who always had good questions and thoughtful comments, and were a real asset. And if the minutes would express that, I would appreciate. I just wanted to add my recognition for their service to this commission. And that said, I will ask you to look at the minutes of the December 22 meeting. Are there any questions or comments from the minutes? Chair will entertain a motion to approve with a second. All right, those in favor say aye. Aye. Carried. Thank you. Now I will yield to our director, Dr. Lippard, for the commission and staff update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So first of all, on the commission update, we just want to take a moment to recognize that our longest serving member, County Executive Jeff Huffman, has been recently reappointed, so his streak continues, so congratulations. Since 1994, for anyone who's curious. Yep. And then next, under our staff update, we have 3 recent promotions among TACIR staff. We have Chris Belden, Presley Powers, and Dr. Mike Strickland. If you 3 could stand, please. All 3 were recently promoted to senior research associates in recognition of their excellent work. We've been absolutely thrilled with both their work and their attitudes. Have been great members of the team, so congratulations to all 3 of you. And also, while Presley's still standing, just want to also acknowledge that she just completed her 2nd graduate degree, a master's in public administration from Tennessee State University, and I believe she's already enrolled in the PhD program, so congratulations.
Wow.
And Mr. Chair, that completes the update.
We have the Tennessee Valley Authority payments in lieu of taxes, the annual report which will be for our approval. Mr. Morio, our research manager, is there ready, willing, and certainly able to provide the report, so I'll defer to you if you will take us through this item on our agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Today I'm presenting for your approval the Commission's annual report, the Tennessee Valley Authority's payments in lieu of taxes, which we commonly refer to as pilots, and issues that are affecting those payments and their distribution to the state of Tennessee and our local governments. The report is noted under tab 3 of today's agenda. This was made an annual requirement by Public Chapter 1035, Acts of 2010, and has a statutory deadline at the end of February. There are no recommended actions to be taken by the General Assembly in this year's report, so I will take just a few moments to go over changes from last year's payments and briefly call your attention to some ongoing issues staff will continue to monitor in the coming year. If we begin on page 4, is where we report that in federal fiscal year 2021-22, the TVA's total payments in lieu of taxes to the states it serves was $512 million, and from that, Tennessee received $345 million. TVA's total payments for the current federal fiscal year, which runs through September 2023, are estimated to increase by $99 million to a total of $611 million. You'll note this is a 19% increase, and that came despite sales of electricity increasing only 3% from the previous federal fiscal year. So because TVA's wholesale rate structure separates fuel cost recovery from other base revenue, higher fuel prices get passed on to local power companies and customers leading to this increase in TVA's revenue. It's important to understand that changes in fuel costs in either direction can affect the pilot amount, and that lower fuel costs would generate less revenue from fuel cost recovery. And Appendix A of the report explains in details how TVA's revenue determines the total tax equivalent payments. So for federal fiscal year 2023, TVA's payments to Tennessee are estimated to increase by $65 million to a total of $410 million. Table 1 on page 5 shows TVA's distributions to Tennessee by federal fiscal year. On a state fiscal year basis, payments to Tennessee for the state fiscal year that runs through June 2023 are estimated to increase by $49 million from state fiscal year 2022. This amount is less than that $65 million I just mentioned because the state's fiscal year begins on July 1st and 3 months earlier than the federal fiscal year. And so the distribution for state fiscal year 2022-23 includes TVA's payments from the last 3 months of the federal fiscal year 21-22, when the pilot increase had been smaller. All the payments to each county and city for state fiscal year 2022-23, along with explanation of the state's allocation formula, are detailed in the appendices at the end of the report. Before I move on to discuss some developing issues that may affect pilot payments in the future, let me quickly say that while prolonged periods of extremely hotter or colder than normal temperatures can affect the amount and distribution of TVA's payments to the states, individual events like the record freeze we experienced this Christmas are unlikely to have noticeable effects on pilot amounts. The report mentions TVA's strategies to manage short-term weather-related demand increases on page 6. Skipping ahead then to page 11, the report says that as TVA continues to rebalance its generating fleet, most notably as it retires aging coal power plants, the resulting changes could cause shifts in the value of power property from state to state and from county to county, which could affect each state's and county's share of TVA's pilot. This had been working in Tennessee's favor for several years. However, Tennessee's share of TVA's power property decreased for the second year in a row in federal fiscal year 2021-22. The report notes that these decreases are likely attributable to TVA's investments in Kentucky and Alabama, combined with an accelerated depreciation of TVA's Bull Run plant in Anderson County in anticipation of its 2023 retirement, which were only partially offset by new investments at the Johnsonville plant in Humphreys County, among others. TVA has also announced it will retire the coal-fired units at its Cumberland plant in Stewart County by the end of 2028, but will replace those with a new combined cycle natural gas plant on adjacent property. Page 19 of the report, we explained that TVA has also recommended retirement of the remaining coal-fired units at its Kingston plant in Roane County beginning in 2026. The official decision and any plans for future investments at Kingston should be coming later this year, and the retirement process may extend through 2033. TVA is also evaluating retirement for its Gallatin plant in Sumner County by the end of 2031 and its Shawnee, Kentucky plant by 2033. TVA's decisions regarding where to build replacement units for these coal-fired units could affect Tennessee's share of pilot payments in the future, and staff will be watching for updates throughout the year and coming years. Next, changes in TVA's wholesale power contracts with its distributors can also affect TVA's gross power revenue and therefore the pilot. And the report describes the effects of these contracts on pages 12 through 14. TVA began offering new long-term contracts to its 153 distributors in 2019, and as of November 14, 2022, 147 had signed these agreements. Rebates to these 147 distributors reduced TVA's revenue by $199 million in federal fiscal year 2022, which reduced the total pilot for federal fiscal year 2023 by $10 million and Tennessee's share by approximately $6.7 million. Provisions included in these contracts grant distributors flexibility to obtain renewable energy from sources other than TVA, either by generating it themselves or by purchasing it from other entities, which could affect future payments to Tennessee. As of November 14th, 80 distributors, 47 in Tennessee, had signed flexibility agreements as part of their long-term partnership contracts with TVA, allowing them to obtain up to 5% of their power from other sources. So far, there are only 4 utilities in Tennessee purchasing power from entities other than TVA under these flexibility agreements. Power purchased at wholesale from these entities is subject to equivalent payments that were required by Public Chapter 1035 Acts of 2010, Tennessee Code Annotated 67-43101 for all you paying attention at home. And as of January 2023, however, no payments pursuant to that law are known to have been made to Tennessee, and so we're working with the Department of Revenue staff, and they're working to clarify aspects of that 2010 law's implementation related to those payments required under it. Lastly, beginning on page 15, the report discusses the possibility that one or more power companies might leave the TVA system. It appears, though, that the prospect of a major distributor leaving the system has diminished, at least for the time being. Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, MLGW, which serves the cities and unincorporated areas of Shelby County and accounts for 9% of TVA's revenue, had decided to remain with TVA on its existing contract in December 2022, following a multi-year study of other power supply options. And its departure, as was noted in previous reports, would have reduced TVA's overall pilot and the share allocated to Tennessee. That said, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have at this time, and otherwise I thank you. Ask for your approval of the report.
Are there questions? Yes, Executive Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob, let me ask you, when there's a new TVA structure that's built, let's say there's a substation with a grid that goes to it, what's the process and how and who determines what the TVA in lieu of payments are for that kind of structure? Do you know, would a local government, for example, know what impact that has on their revenue when TVA is building a facility like that, or is that something that comes later once they get it on and they get some kind of a revenue projection, or how does that work?
Thank you, Executive Huffman. So I think there are a couple different things you touched on in there. When there's an active construction project, part of the money that is allotted to each state is designated for these areas impacted by construction projects. Flipping back to the Appendix B, so where there's a portion of that allocation is going to be divided among areas where there are construction projects. Another part of that would be when there are TVA properties and TVA facilities already built and existing, there are a portion of the payments that are direct payments that it makes to counties, and that are, as long as they're for power purposes. So some things might not qualify, but then that would also, investments like that would affect the share of the overall total to some extent, because you go on the each state's share of TVA's power property. So if you start improving the value of property in one state, making a lot of investments, and that's going to shift that part of the equation over to that particular state.
But the direct in lieu of TVA payment that county would receive from that facility being there would go up.
I would believe so. I think, but
is there any way to know how is that decided?
That's all at TVA's level, as far as I believe the book value and the what those values are.
Well, let me ask it this way: at the West Tennessee mega site, TVA is building a substation to serve that. It's 55-acre site. That's a huge substation for anybody, even TVA. How would Haywood County, for example, or the mega site authority, or Tennessee, whoever's receiving the in lieu of directly from that facility, how would you project what that's going to be? Or is that something that comes after the fact, when revenues are starting to generate and they know how much usage is, which is also, of course, going to be huge, somewhere around 250 megawatts. So
I would, yeah, I believe that would have to be some sort of a discussion directly with TVA as far as how that property is valued. I don't, what, it's not something that we've dug down to that level of through working on this report, but
But they build facilities, substations all over the state, and someone with TVA or a team are determining how much in lieu of TVA is responsible for paying to someone. But that's under TVA, that's not, you don't get that far in a report like this, you don't get into
right,
that
yeah,
kind of an area.
correct. We don't get that level of detail. I know it's direct payments to counties are made directly from TVA. A lot of the other stuff goes through our Department of Revenue as far as things that are allocated out through our formula. So it would be one of those two avenues. I mean, I'd certainly help you get in touch with the folks at TVA that might be able to answer those questions if you
But
don't.
you can see the issue if it's Haywood County, for example. I can't speak for them, but if they're struggling to come up with infrastructure to meet the needs out there, and there's going to be TVA in lieu of payment, it's critical at some point that they know what that's going to be and if they're going to get it, because that can go toward paying for some of those, providing resources for some of that infrastructure. Just, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And Bob's answer, of course, is correct. But Dr. Owen, whose dissertation was on TVA, has one little nugget to add to that.
That's not the topic of the dissertation, but TVA was no. So just for the direct payments to counties specifically, it's my understanding under federal law, those are based on the actual property taxes paid for that property for the 2 to 3 years prior. So it's the average of those taxes. So my understanding is that would not change from year to year going forward.
So it's to replace property taxes that would have been paid?
That's how those direct payments to counties work. That's my understanding.
How does that work if the state owns the property?
That is a good question, and I would have to look into that for you. I don't know if it goes back, if it would even go further back. I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I don't even know if TVA would pay in lieu of taxes, but it's a question that needs to be asked because that could be a big number.
The averaging of the property tax, is that the way they calculate what we call the impact money, TVA impact fees?
The impact fees,
Is that what we're talking about here?
no, sir. That's different.
Okay.
So that the impact fees are for counties with TVA construction, and that comes through the state's distribution formula. That's one of the pots of money through there. And that is not based on the value of property.
And so then the Executive Huffman's question dealt with just in lieu of tax.
But, so that's
Based on property tax, lost property tax.
correct. So I guess I should step back. This goes back into the federal law requiring TVA to make payments in lieu of tax to the states in its service area. So part of that is to require direct payments to the counties in which TVA owns power property.
Yes.
And so that's where this average of the prior property values, or property taxes, excuse me, comes into play.
All right. Who made that formula on the average? Is that statutory?
I believe it's statutory, yes, sir.
All right. And then y'all can draw straws for this question. On the in lieu of tax that they pay to Tennessee based on a percentage of the gross power sales, which I think is 5%. Did I hear you to say that we are buying some power outside from wholesalers outside of Tennessee, but we are not receiving the 5% on that? Help me here. I tried hard to pay
Right, so
attention, but
that's-
I didn't quite catch all that.
So it was
I thought
something.
the law said they had to do that.
So the way let me back up to the law that's now 67-43101 that requires the equivalent payments to be made was created as a precaution back when this report first started. There were cooperatives that were forming to sell power that was going to come from outside TVA, and it was going to reduce the revenue.
Yeah.
And so this was created to address that, which at the time actually never ended up really materializing. And so now the new provisions in these flexibility agreements that are letting the individual power companies either generate some of their own power or contract it through another party, up to 5% of their total needs. Those payments, power sold by those companies would be subject to that equivalent payment. What we're saying is that we're not sure. It's really just started. There was one company that had any revenue in the last fiscal year. There's 3 that have just come online as recently as December of 2022. So it's really just in a developing type of situation to see how the Department of Revenue handles that. And there are also in that law, that you take that 5% and then you have credits against it based on those companies are paying franchise and excise and other kinds of, they're paying other taxes that TVA normally wouldn't. So there's a credit, there's a balance to that.
Does the statute provide for that?
Yes.
Allow that? Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right, I won't take the committee's time with additional follow-up to that, but perhaps if Director Lippard would allow it, I'd like to sit down and have a talk with you, because I have a
Absolutely.
lot of
Yes.
questions. I just, we need to make sure that everybody pays their fair share. And on that note, Ryan, Representative Williams, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to follow up on what he was saying, typically it's been my experience in city government, when you have a private entity or a quasi-governmental entity, they pay in lieu of taxes on not only the ground, if you will, but they pay the improvement value. So if in the instance that Executive Huffman was saying, even if the state retained the property owner rights through a lease through the Megasite Authority, those property improvements there would still be a formulary for that portion of the improvements on that property. Would there not? I mean, I think it would be incumbent upon, based upon what he was saying, for that community to know, because they're going to have to serve the area surrounding it. But to me, it seems like it is. Is it your understanding that payment in lieu of taxes is both ground and improved values?
I can't say right now that I know for sure that level as it pertains to that particular part of the amount. I know Matt was correct, to some extent of that they look at the taxes that were being paid previously when it was presumably nothing, and then just making up for at least that tax revenue that they're not going to be able to collect. But what else might go into that, I don't know. It would be something we can dig into further and get back to all of you.
Well, thank you, Chairman. As a
Yes.
side note, I'm sure we'll have many updates from the Megasite Authority as they come here. It would be nice to know if they've retained ownership or whether they deeded that property to TVA in order to do that, because it wouldn't be unusual for us to give them the land to do it, but it would also allow us to better understand what formulary they'd be using, if any at all.
Yes.
But anyways, thank you.
Well taken. I appreciate those comments. There we go. Are there other questions? There being none, thank you very much. It was a very thoughtful program and has generated a lot more questions that we'll look forward to talking to you about.
Look forward to doing it again next year.
Thank you.
We do need approval of this one. We do need an approval of this one.
All right. I believe that we will need a vote of approval on this, so the chair will entertain a motion to approve the report.
Second.
There's a motion. Who made the motion? Ron. There's a motion and second. There's a question. There being none, those in favor of approval of the report, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. There are none. It carries. Thank you. Our next item I call your attention to is the annual report on Tennessee's public infrastructure needs. This is the final report and will require approval. We ask you to turn to tab 4. And is this Tyler? Yeah. Okay. And I will defer to Tyler Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Commission,
I have Presley Powers here with me. She's going to help me out today. Today I'll present the annual Public Infrastructure Needs Inventory Report for your approval. The report can be found behind tab 4. This year's report is consistent with previous year's reports, but is based on the 5-year period, July 2021 to June 2026. I just want to draw your attention to a few points of interest in this year's report. First, if you will turn your attention to Figure 1 on page 9, you will see that the total estimated cost per capita of all needed public infrastructure improvements in Tennessee increased for the 7th year, but declined slightly when adjusted for inflation. In Table 1 on page 10, you can see that in this year's inventory, state and local officials report a total need of $62.9 billion, which is about $1.1 billion more than last year. The categories most responsible for the reported increase in total estimated costs are transportation and utilities, and health, safety, and welfare. Infrastructure needs for transportation and utilities, which continues to be the largest category in the inventory, increased by $750 million and now totals $35.2 billion. Health, safety, and welfare infrastructure needs increased by $669 million. And most of this increase is from the $305 million rise in needed improvements for water and wastewater, which included $373 million in new projects alone. Education needs, which include K-12 and post-secondary institutions, decreased by $379 million, or 2.5%. Post-secondary education costs decreased by $1 billion, or 15.6%. This decrease was offset by a $404 million or 12.6% increase in the total estimated cost for new public schools and additions, which totals $3.6 billion. A breakdown of education infrastructure needs can be found in Table 2 on page 14. Within the general government category, other facilities needs increased by $109 million, or 79.8%, while public buildings decreased by $26 million, or 2.4%. The final point of interest I want to highlight is that, as in previous years, just over 2/3 of the needs in the inventory are not funded. However, as projects move from the conceptual stage to the planning and design stage, more funding will become available for them. This was all a brief overview of the report. And if you would like to see how your county is performing, please take a look at the county summaries that start on page 19. In Appendix D, you can find the project type and stage of development. And Appendix E contains information related to school districts. Lastly, public infrastructure needs continue to be surveyed by the development districts for next year's report. And I'd like to thank the development districts for all their hard work in collecting this information. I also want to personally thank Presley Powers for all the work that she put into this report and in communicating and collecting needs from state agencies. I'd also like to thank the TACIR staff that have been incredibly helpful in the development of this report and in laying it out and correcting all of the minor mistakes that we found late in the process. I want to thank you for your time, and at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions? Executive Huffman, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for the report, and this is excellent. This is a lot of work right here. I mean, it really is. You know, Senator Norris used to love this infrastructure report and the information, the data that it had in it. I do have an issue that's connected to this that I would like for TACIR to consider, and that is the wastewater sewer issue across the state. When I contact local officials, they'll tell me real quickly that the limiting factor on growth is the affordability of wastewater sewer. That's the limiting factor. You can maybe make a little money on water, you'll make some money on gas, but wastewater sewer is the monster, so to speak, that takes a lot of money on the front end to build, and it takes a lot of money to operate and a lot of expertise. And that really is holding a lot of communities and areas back in Tennessee. If we look back in, I believe, 2006, I think Bill did a report on wastewater sewer and the condition of wastewater sewer in Tennessee. That was that was a long time ago now, 17 years ago. In the report, I believe there were 450 wastewater sewer systems in Tennessee, and between 80 and 90 of them had enforcement letters. I just wonder if that's gotten any better or if it's gotten any worse. I wonder if Tennessee and the way municipalities and utility districts are required to operate, if there's a better way to still be financially responsible, but make it less difficult to come up with dollars and less difficult to operate these systems. Because what's happening now, it looks like to me, is it gets to a point in Tennessee almost always, not 100%, but almost always, the system just has to completely break down or get on the verge of breaking down, and you start getting enforcement letters, and then you have to do something. And that's the most expensive approach to operating these systems. It hurts the environment, and it makes it more expensive to solve the problem. And so, Mr. Chairman, I just thought that maybe, and I know staff, they do a good job and they've got plenty to do, but I would really like to look at an overall assessment of wastewater sewer systems in the state and come up with something that maybe other states take a look and see if they're operating, requiring the local governments and utility districts to operate differently that might help us in this state. Particularly in West Tennessee, around Blue Oval City, of course, that is magnified because rural West Tennessee has gone from a soybean field to a huge industrial project, and in that blast zone, so to speak, there's no infrastructure, and we're struggling with that. But as I got more and more into looking at regional systems, everybody's got the same problem. It is extremely expensive and difficult in Tennessee to get ahead of these problems before you've got real environmental damage and enforcement letters. I don't know how many enforcement letters are pending from TDEC now. TDEC does a great job on their website of getting information out and working with folks and working with the EPA. But I do think it's an important enough issue that TACIR ought to spend some time researching that again and seeing what the numbers are now 17 years later, when it's even more critical than it was in 2006.
Executive, what we'll do, if you don't mind, we have someone else waiting for the floor, but we'll conclude when we conclude the discussion and approve this report. Then I'll be happy. I'm going to yield to you to make a motion.
Thank you.
Okay, and I believe Senator Lumber, were you waiting for the floor?
Yeah, thank you for the report. The numbers are difficult for many to grasp. So let's talk about transportation and on the per capita, not the numbers, but the percentage. Has the percentage per capita grown over 10, 15 years, or is that percentage maintaining a certain equilibrium?
I believe the percentage has grown fairly consistently over the years. Prior to this meeting, we did look at the percentage from last year to this year because we had that decrease when considering, when adjusting for inflation, and that decrease was 4%. In that process, I looked back, and I don't have the exact numbers for you. I'm happy to get them, but it did look like it was fairly consistent percentage growth each year. But I don't know the exact number off the top of my head.
One more, and sometime just, if you would, can you email that to me or communicate with me somehow? I'd just be curious.
Yes, sir.
Like over a 10, 20-year period.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I was looking at the Rutherford County on page 95. And as you know, or you may not know, solid waste is a huge issue in Rutherford County right now. And I noticed that it had 800,000 there through 26. And I was just checking, is the county providing you this information, or, because it seems to be, from my understanding, that a substantial amount more than that within the next year, much less 26.
Oh, so there's 2 points to that. One, this information does come from county officials. Our surveyors survey them, and what we report is what is reported to us. So it is self-reported. The other thing is that you have to take into consideration that this report is reflecting all needs, the status of all needs as of July 2021. So there's a little bit of a lag time. So any projects or any projects that have been conceived since then will not be in this report, but may be in next year's report.
Okay, thank you. I know we've talked about a transfer station and all those types of things. So
And I'm happy to
I was-
look into
I
that
was
for
just
you as
wondering,
well.
but no, thank you for your point.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate this report. A couple things. One is, costs are incredibly hard to predict, obviously, because we have change in, material goods and all those sorts of things, and inflation, all those kinds of things. So it's always a moving target. Did you do any, since you had a reduction because of things that have been done, in some of these numbers, did you do any retrospective analysis to see if the predictions were accurate when we were looking at these moving forward before? Are we meeting expectations with costs generally?
I can give you an answer based on some of the projects I've seen. We have not done a comprehensive review on that specifically. Typically, we tend to see the completion of projects, I would say for the most part, they're on par, but occasionally you'll see a larger number. But that can have to do with, that could just have to do with the cost figures not being finalized until that is completed. And sometimes the numbers that are given to us are estimates. And so it's not something that we've looked into, but I have seen in many cases, most cases they're right on par, but sometimes it is, there is an increase at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So these numbers are coming from, you're getting them from the counties?
Some of the numbers. So we get data from TDOT. We get it from the state agencies as well, and then our development districts survey the counties and cities. And so it's a mixture. It depends on which category you're speaking to. Obviously, transportation is going to be more from TDOT. So it just depends on what we're talking about specifically. So.
And just one more. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, the other thing I'll just say from our Davidson County perspective is, the unpredictability of the future of our solid waste situation, for example, makes it, we don't know necessarily that this is where these dollars are going to end up right now. That's those and wastewater, as Mr. Huffman said earlier, those sorts of things are hard to predict and huge issues that we're dealing with. So, I would just say that the longer we wait, probably the more expensive it gets. So.
Thank you again for the report. Just to clarify on what Mr. Peach was saying, so these projections go through 2026 based upon our individual communities, and in that 2026, it's based upon a date which is from 2021 going forward 5 years. Is that correct?
Kind of. So that 5-year window is so a project will be included in this report if the fiscal start date is, if a project is in some stage of development between 2021 and 26. So that means that if the fiscal year start date is 2026, it'll be in this report, but there are some projects that get pushed out to 27, 28. So it's not a projection of cost out to 2026. It is in 2021 or previously, what's the reported cost to our surveyors or us? And so that's what we report. It's not necessarily a projection into the future. It's the dollars that they foresee it costing, but it's what they know of right now.
So it's what they anticipate on expending between now and then.
Right, yeah. I'm sure there is some projection there, but it's not, we don't do the projections.
Right. One other question. As many of the members of this body know, the legislature and through some federal funding and state partnerships set aside a large sum of money, of which we started sending out grants, some of which were for water line or water treatment facilities and those kinds of things. Are any of those, because that was kind of new to the game, I guess, was any of those monies, like in my community, the city and the county partnered to build a wastewater treatment. They got the grant in order to do that. And so but I don't think we ever had the idea of doing this until we knew these funds would be available. So I guess, do you know if any of those monies that were going to be issued statewide were included in your report or no?
So the federal dollars, we looked into those, and the American Rescue Plan money that came in, the first distribution or the award from TDEC occurred in, I believe it was October of last year. Mm-hmm. The cutoff for this report was 2021, July of 2021. Mm-hmm. And so my estimation is that we may see preemptive projects before that money starts to come down in the next inventory year, but most likely we're going to see that in the following. I am starting to see Blue Oval related projects in the inventory, but that again will not be until next year, based on when the project was approved, and so to answer your question, the TDEC funds from the ARP. Mm-hmm. We'll probably start to see that next year, if not the following.
Okay. One other question. I think it's important, and particularly the members on this committee that serve in the General Assembly, it would be good to know how much of an impact those ARPA funds made, because it's been as it relates to the total unfunded liabilities, and particularly in wastewater and water, because that's where the money went. As we're going forward, if we're blessed to see the kind of returns that the state currently has, having those large sums of money by which counties and cities can draw down to do these grants, it would be interesting to see what that net impact would be on these unfunded liabilities going forward, so that if the legislature wanted to say in the future, we're going to commit to setting aside $250 million over the next budget cycle over these to try to pay this down. But if your study next year comes back and it shows that we really didn't move the needle at all as it relates to these things, then maybe it wouldn't be a point. But my encouragement or exhortation would be if we could somehow, as we study the inventory for next year, if we can somehow extrapolate that data to see what the impact was, and particularly in that one line item, I think it would be good. But thank you.
Director Lippert and Mayor Franks is waiting, but Director Lippert.
Just, I think it might, and Tyler, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's possible. We did, you recall, a report, I guess it's been the year before last now, on the effect of the pandemic on infrastructure costs and what have you. And we were supposed to be doing a follow-up on that. It's been kind of tabled while we finish mandated reports, since it was just a staff-generated report. That's possibly a topic we could take up in that second report. It seems certainly germane to the topics. That was the source of those, the rationale for those ARP funds. So I think that's something we can, as that information comes in, and as Tyler said, it may not be next year, but more the year after that. I think that's definitely something we could analyze in that follow-up report.
Thank you. I think it'd be great. I think, the legislature has spent an inordinate amount of money on capital projects for higher education over the last 3 years and paid for them all with cash. I do think it's important for us to look and see what those similar investments would be in our infrastructure across the state, much like we did in those areas too. So, thank you.
Mayor Frank, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is just a comment, not a question, but I did want to note that our East Tennessee Development District just had a meeting, and as the saying goes, were your ears burning, because TACIR received a lot of compliments for this report and the data that is on there and available to counties. And just the comment is that as an organization, we're looking at how to take the TACIR information and maybe better align that with local government needs and development of capital infrastructure plans for each local government. And just a little note that you may see some recommendations come your way from our development district, where we're looking at maybe that summary page can flesh out a little bit more. So if you're a mayor, for instance, and you look at that, you're not quite aware unless you really get into the appendix section that transportation is both state and local and some of those things. So we're probably going to just make a couple of suggestions that way, but we're going to use this as a springboard to help local governments on meeting those infrastructure needs.
Other questions? Executive Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one more. School systems and school classrooms, let's say the General Assembly changed the requirements for school class sizes, and that as it did when BEP was formed, it caused local school systems to have to build more classrooms. Is that something, do you all have a template that you use that you send to the development districts? Is that something that you would add and say, listen, this is the new law regarding classroom sizes. You need to evaluate what that's going to do in terms of additional construction that might be needed or might not be needed. Is that something that you highlight or make a note of when you send out the questionnaire and all on it?
I believe so. So on the school, so the surveyors have a school form and a general inventory form that they will use when surveying. We do capture, that would fall under additions, and we do, when they're doing the assessment of the schools and school condition, they do report how many additional classrooms they need and the cost of those, and they're instructed to ask those questions and make sure that that is captured in the inventory.
But you don't generally put a footnote in there anywhere that says this is a new change in the law that could cause an impact on construction for your school systems. You need to make sure you take that into consideration. You don't really do that.
No, we don't. No, I don't believe the information. I think the information just flows to our surveyors and not the other way.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there other questions? We are ready for a vote. Those in favor of approval of the annual report of Tennessee's public infrastructure needs, say aye.
Aye.
I don't believe I got a motion, but yeah, we had two willing volunteers over here. Now, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed say nay. There are none. The motion to approve carries. Executive Huffman, I'm recognizing you for purposes of a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we direct TACIR staff to take a look again at the condition of wastewater sewer systems in Tennessee, much along the line of the publication the staff put together in 2006 to look basically an assessment of how many wastewater sewer systems have enforcement letters pending as of a date certain. Are there best practices that they can take a look at in other states that we might apply in Tennessee? Are there new technologies that are available now that haven't been available before now that municipalities and utility districts to consider that would work and would be permittable under TDAC rules? And are there systems in other areas that have not worked that we need to avoid? Those are the kind of things in the study I think that we need to take a look at. And then on the financing side, are there better ways to come up with capital funding to build not only the lines but the treatment centers? And in terms of the operating budget, are there changes that can be made or better ways in other areas to help offset the tremendous cost of operating these facilities in Tennessee?
All right, is there a second to that? A second, we have a motion made with a second. Do you have questions? There being none, those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Carries. Thank
The staff all voted no, I think.
you. Did you get all that? Did you get the, we trust you got the motion all down? Okay.
We've already titled the report.
And I call your attention, members, to our next item on our agenda today, reference-based pricing, the final report for approval. I'd call your attention further to tab 5, and Dr. Strickland, our senior research associate, will present it. Dr. Strickland, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you. And good afternoon, Commissioners. This is the final report on reference-based pricing in healthcare, located behind tab 5, and which is being submitted for your approval. This report was prepared in response to Senate Bill 2330 by Senator Hensley and House Bill 2456 by Representative Sparks, which the Commission voted to take up in June of last year. At the presentation of the draft report last month, no changes or additions were requested, and as before, the report makes no recommendations, but simply presents the staff's findings. The staff have found that reference-based pricing would likely generate savings for insurers, could produce savings for patients depending on how it is structured and whether it prevents balance billing, and may induce healthcare providers to lower prices, although this is not guaranteed. Hospitals in other states, though, have been strongly opposed to reference-based pricing, and Tennessee's own Benefits Administration has raised concerns that providers might leave the state's health plan networks because of it. With all that being said, I'd be happy to take any questions and would ask for your approval of the report.
Do we have questions for Dr. Strickland? Are there questions? Yes, Councilman. Councilman Carlisle, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine's not a question as much of a comment if the right question was really asked. You were asked to look and evaluate reference-based pricing within the current parameters of how insurance companies operate on a state-by-state basis and the level of competition. Ultimately, the General Assembly is looking for the most effective, efficient way to deliver good health benefits to state employees and the most cost-effective manner, like any other business. I mentioned this last time I was here to speak about it. Our company has 8,000 employees. We have several, and we've been on reference-based pricing for years. But I think the question really should have been, why haven't we supported, perhaps through the governor's office, with other states taking down the arbitrary boundary of state lines and creating more transparency in pricing and a more competitive environment in the insurance market? I think, and ultimately, as you may or may not have read in the city of Memphis, we are a Blue Cross Blue Shield city and no longer have opportunities with Methodist Healthcare. And you start looking at market share in Blue Cross Blue Shield in other states like Louisiana and Arkansas, where they own 90% of the market share. There's no competition. And so small businesses, mid-sized companies, corporations, and government entities have moved towards other things like partially funded, fully funded, self-funded with stop-loss insurance or reference-based pricing in order for cost savings, when in reality, it's a competitive market advantage or really a disadvantage to business owners. And so I think that that's the real question that I would ask the members of the General Assembly in discussions, perhaps maybe not on the floor, but to really start to consider the state's position in the U.S. economy to why we don't allow the free markets to be the free markets. It's more of a federal question, but certainly states have the opportunity to take a position. And I think that would have been the question I would have studied is, if Tennessee supported the ability for insurance companies to come across state lines for the benefit of the market, is that a position it should take and support? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those are my remarks.
Are there other questions or comments, Dr. Strickland? There being none, Chair to entertain a motion for approval. Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? There being none, those in favor of the motion to approve, say aye. And the opposed, nay. There being no nay, the report on reference-based pricing, the final report, has been approved. Thank you very much, Dr. Strickland. And now we have I bring your attention to the comprehensive litter review, the final report for approval, which will be tab 6, and our research manager, Jennifer Berry, will present the report. Jennifer Berry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members. I'm presenting the final report addressing litter and illegal dumping in the state for your approval. We prepared this report in response to members' concerns and direction at the June 2021 meeting to conduct a comprehensive study of litter and illegal dumping in Tennessee to include research on the effects on the environment, economy, and overall quality of life in the state. The Commission also clarified that the study would not focus on a bottle deposit or plastic bags because the General Assembly has already considered those issues. We added some information to the report based on questions and comments from Commission members at the last meeting, and that information is highlighted yellow. In response to Mayor Brooks' question about the bills that would have implemented the Commission's recommendations from the 2020 Waste Tire Report, on page 7, we added that the Senate bill was assigned to the General Subcommittee of the Senate Energy, Agriculture, and Natural Resources Committee, and the House bill failed in the House Agriculture and Natural Resources Subcommittee. And in response to Senator Lundberg's concern and question about the special litter grant application being burdensome for small municipalities, on page 3, we added, Beautification Office staff said they will review the special litter grant application process and look for ways to simplify and improve the process to help more cities apply. The recommendations in the report have not changed since the last meeting. They are, the Commission recommends cities that need additional funding to deal with litter apply for special litter grants. Further, a permanent statewide litter task force, as recommended by this report, should gather data and assess the needs of cities across the state and help them connect with funding opportunities such as the special litter grants. To help communities find resources and solutions, the Commission recommends the Beautification Office and Keep Tennessee Beautiful collaborate to create an online toolkit with resources for local governments based on best practices. To improve enforcement of litter laws, the Commission recommends the state support and facilitate more litter law enforcement training for law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and judges. And it recommends state and local governments consider focused enforcement of tarping laws in problem areas such as roads that lead to landfills and convenience centers. To provide coordinated support on an ongoing basis, the Commission recommends the state create a permanent litter task force that includes diverse stakeholders to help implement strategies in communities across the state. And it recommends this group consider developing it and implementing a statewide action plan like Pennsylvania's. The Commission continues to recommend the state implement the other recommendations made in TACIR's 2020 Waste Tire Report. Thank you. I'm happy to answer your questions and request approval of this report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an issue near and dear to my heart. Litter is a very, it got worse during the pandemic, and it's just a huge problem, especially in Nashville. I don't know how bad is it, yeah. I passed a bill last year to increase litter fines, and as you know, because I talked to you about this report, when I was on the council in Minneapolis, or in St. Paul, had a Clean for the Green project that was a relationship between businesses and nonprofits. My question is this, and this is maybe more of a question to people who've been here longer than I have and know a lot more than I do about this. What happens when they recommend a task force on TACIR? I mean, what happens to that recommendation?
I'll defer to Dr. Lippert on that one.
Well, I would say probably the most recent example would be on our broadband study we did a couple of years ago, and we recommended a task force, and actually they did create a task force, and I think it's and Dr. Owen, shake your head if I'm right, I think they're still meeting periodically, or no, not anymore. But they did. They did meet, and they did actually form there is another group that is now kind of spun off from that. But that's more at UT though. We'll talk later. But the short answer is when we did we recommended a task force, and it was more of for a specific project, the creation of those grants. So it would make sense that they wouldn't necessarily need the task force beyond that. But it was beneficial in the creation and implementation of the broadband grants initially. So I think we do have some experience of task forces. Being recommended and actually being implemented.
So my question would be like, this is coming to us. We're receiving this, and then after this, does this also go to somebody who can actually make the decision to create a task force?
Certainly. So all of our reports are shared with the General Assembly, and when they're reports that are recommended by specific committees, they are also shared directly with the committee chairs, and so. And of course, we also share them with the relevant departments. So the short answer is hopefully.
I believe Chairman Williams was waiting, and then Councilman Carlisle will be next.
Thank you. As a follow-on to what Dr. Lippard was saying, as somebody who has done this before, whenever TACIR gives us a recommendation, if it was your bill that started the process of the study, usually it's your responsibility to file a bill accordingly after that to enact what was recommended by TACIR. In the instance of whether or not a task force does it, any member of the General Assembly can file a bill to create a task force. All they have to do is get it funded, which sometimes is a challenge. But I will say the only recommendation that I would ask if we could do, and I don't know if we can do this verbally or no, because I know you're for the final, but I think many of us were very passionate about the TACIR report and some changes associated, and here we are and no changes. And so I didn't know if we could list what those recommendations were underneath maybe where it says that in the last bulleted amount or a number where it says TACIR's 2020 wastewater report, if we could just say what those recommendations are again underneath that, maybe in a tab bullet, it would be good.
And Chairman, we'll just accept that into the report. There'll be no need to vote on that, to amend it.
Just think it's good to reiterate what we've already said since there's not been any change. Thank you.
All right, I believe Councilman Carlisle is waiting.
Thank you,
You're
Mr.
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the chairman and to the senator for her comments. Memphis is no exception. My colleague Rhonda Logan started a task force to look at blight and litter and bulk waste and exacerbated by the pandemic. It's not. I think often people hear litter and they think I'm out there with a stick on the side of the highway picking up a trash can or a plastic bag, and we are at industrial levels of litter at this point. When you're a border state like Memphis, not only is it a Memphis issue, but we're subject to people crossing state lines and coming in to illegal dump. I mean, I went out to a site next to a church down in Parkway Village, which is in the central south part of the city of Memphis, and we had about 15 volunteers thinking we were going to pick up some tires, and there were about 650 tires out there, and I didn't have a backhoe that day. So we went to another site a block away and cleaned it up. Relative is probably an eighth of an acre. While I was cleaning it up, I found 20 rounds of 7.26 assault rifle ammunition right next to an apartment complex where children play. And so I'm very excited to see this recommendation, and I hope that the General Assembly will support it with the proper funding. I wish that I could say that it is the stick, and we at the city have tried everything to bring the stick against littering. And unfortunately, we've gotten to the point where it's gone carrot now, but we don't have the resources. Last year, we did dumpster days just to have the ability to say, look, please stop dumping on somebody's back property. We'll provide a dumpster. And we have 7 districts to cover 300 square miles. So just to do that one day cost us $1.2 million. And we don't have the ability to do that every day of the year. So Again, I really thank you for the report. It is a common problem, and much like the grant program, I hope there's a significant amount of funding for education, because that's a big piece of this. When you talk to a lot of people that are in the education system in the nonprofit world, as unfortunate as it is, and I wish that there was more familial infrastructure around children and people to help them, there's just not. It is the environment in which we live in. And so we need the funding to do that. And it will help places like Memphis, and I'm sure other cities and counties, recruit and retain businesses, because nobody wants to live in a dirty neighborhood or a dirty city or a dirty county. So I thank the commission for this report, and I strongly urge the members of the General Assembly in their capacities to support this. I know we always like to do big projects, big buildings and growth like that, but this is just as equally as necessary for us to recruit and retain businesses, especially in a place like Memphis, when we've got FedEx, AutoZone, IP, places like that. So again, thank you to the senator and to the chairman for their comments, and I'll yield the floor.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? Well, if there's no objection, the chair has a couple here. I think your recommendation calls for a permanent task force, and to find resources to help communities find resources, and to continue to work with the Beautification Office and the Keep Tennessee Beautiful. This is probably a statement intertwined with the question, but my concern here is that we're just adding another level of bureaucracy. And my fear is that this additional bureaucracy will divert even more funds from where it needs to be into the local communities, on the litter program. Help me here.
Thank you, Chairman. The way we're saying a litter task force is to, we know that there are many agencies, government agencies and non-government organizations and groups of citizens across the state doing putting a lot of effort into addressing litter and dumping. We've heard from stakeholders that the efforts are not coordinated well. There's things happening all over, but they're not coordinated. And so a group of some sort to coordinate all of those efforts, to share resources, and to not be redundant, but to be more efficient and reduce redundancy. If they're coordinating, hopefully they'll be able to figure out who's doing what, who can use which resources, and be a support for all those local governments that are having big challenges and are looking for those resources and looking for that help. And as you all know, each community has unique issues and unique needs. And so the solutions for each community aren't going to be the same. The resources they need aren't going to be the same. And so a statewide group would help coordinate all of that and support the local governments.
And I understand and I appreciate and value that explanation, but I just hasten to add that the Keep Tennessee Beautiful is a statewide organization, I appreciate this. I'm discussing it, not debating it with you, because I value what you tell us. But we have a State Department of, I believe it's the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives, but notwithstanding the title of the office, that office coordinates the work of nonprofits, and perhaps that office should be tasked with the coordination of these groups. I don't know, I'm not going to seek to amend this report, but that's something we might want to look at. And I just have a couple more questions if no one objects. One of your recommendations was to improve the enforcement of litter laws. You recommended more litter law enforcement training for law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and judges. And I think that's a good idea. But the law enforcement officers that I'm talking to tell me that they don't really even attempt to ticket people or proceed because they get no support in the court because our litter laws are so weak. Did your group look at the text of our litter laws? I am an attorney. I haven't practiced in some time, but I do like to read the law occasionally. I'm sorry, everybody has a bad habit. But I'm just really concerned about the weakness of those laws. It is very difficult, in my opinion, speaking in general terms, to get a prosecution because of the way the law is structured. And so so did your group look at that? I mean, education is important. We need to educate the judges and the others, but I think there needs to be a comprehensive look at these laws to strengthen them. And I know your report said that we made the penalty a little bit heavier, but if you can't get anybody to prosecute and you can't get any convictions, it doesn't matter what the penalty is. Would you like to comment and help me out here?
Sure. We did look at the laws. So a couple of things. We did raise that minimum fine, so I think that's probably helpful. As far as the laws being weak, I mean, there are penalties. I think there are different levels of offenses that are clearly laid out in law. I think a big challenge is that it's hard to catch people in the act of littering. That's a big challenge. Previously, the minimum fine was $50, so there might not have been a great incentive to even try to catch people. And the training and education part for law enforcement, or for litter laws, we're deliberately including prosecutors and judges. They also need to be trained, and that's from the research and stakeholders and experts. Training judicial representatives is a key part and will help everyone better understand the laws, what the penalties are, and will hopefully help with more prosecutions happening.
And I understand that, but let me talk about a situation here where you didn't see the litterer, but somebody just left a bag of trash where they shouldn't have been. So you open the bag up, look at all the pieces, and you can tell from the names inside the bag who did that or who that belongs to. It's very difficult to get prosecutions because of something called rebuttable presumptions in the law, and that's something we need to look at if we're going to get these convictions. I'm just telling you, the law enforcement people that I'm talking to tell me that they just don't want to get involved because they know they're not going to get anything done the way the law is written. And I have more questions, but I want others to participate. Mr. Bradshaw? Okay. Do you have any additional comment? Is there any objection? I have maybe just one or two more. I read in here somewhere that about 15% of the litter grant that goes to the county is unspent. And I may be off a percent or two. I think it's about 15%. Where does that money go? The unspent money, does that come back into the litter grant budget or to the general fund of the state of Tennessee?
So the litter grants are reimbursable, so that money actually doesn't go anywhere. It stays in the litter grant fund. So if counties aren't doing their activities and submitting for the reimbursements, they're not being reimbursed for their litter prevention activities. That money doesn't get spent. It stays in the litter grant fund, and it has to be spent on litter prevention activities. So what the beautification office still uses those funds for litter prevention, and they're spent on the special litter grants, which cities and nonprofit organizations can also apply for. And they also use some of that funding for other campaigns like the Nobody Trashes Tennessee. So they're used for litter prevention, but the counties that don't spend that money, it stays in that fund and it's used in other ways.
I think when we get to the budget process, we will look as I serve on the Finance Committee on the Senate side. We will look at the history of the fund balances of some of these organizations, and I don't know if you would know this. Is the fund balance of the Litter Association growing, or is it all going back into programs? I want to know
The litter
that.
grant fund?
Are they building a reserve with this money? Or are they using it all?
No, they're using it. I mean, there is a reserve, but they wait every a couple years or so, and then they'll put out a request for special litter grants. So it might build up. It will build up over a couple years, and then when they have enough to put out the request for the special litter grant, then they'll accept applications and then spend it on the special litter grant. So it's typically been the cycle.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Are there other questions? Mayor?
Just kind of one comment on the litter grant itself. I know in Loudoun County, we bought our trucks we take the inmates out with, and talk about not spending the entire amount in it. I know a lot of times, like if something really bad happened to the truck, transmission, something like that would come out of the litter grant as well, because repairs can come out of that. So a lot of times we'll catch ourselves towards the end of the fiscal year with a little bit of a balance. Now, I don't know, I think we do a pretty good job of spending it, I think, but you get towards the end of the year, some counties, cities, organizations may be a little bit weary of spending too close, and then get towards the end of the fiscal year not having to spend it just because of the way it's kind of structured. Like I said, we do a lot with it, and I'd love to see an expansion of litter grant. I think it's a great thing. We do some for education, and one of the things I noticed in this report was the local roads are the least littered, and interstates are the most. And I think using that litter grant to create that community awareness is a long way. We really appreciate it in Loudoun County. It's a good thing. Thank you.
Appreciate that. If I may make a comment, the funding for the litter grant comes from a tax, a portion of the tax on malt beverages and soft drink, and that the industry stepped up to the plate and made this offer several years ago, and I've had the privilege to carry that renewal. I believe it's every 6 years that is renewed. And it would take an act of the legislature to fund it, to increase any funding through that route, but I'm something that the industry would be happy to talk to you about. Your point is well taken. Are there, I think Chairman Williams had one on the floor.
Well, sometimes when we talk too much, we come up with stuff to ask. But I'm trying to remember how much generally is the litter grant annually? Do you know?
You mean for each county?
No, the total dollar number.
5.5 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just think it's of note, if it's 5.5 million and we're doing it through our great relationships with beverage companies, then and it costs us, I think the councilman said 1.9 million in one municipality, 1.2 million in one municipality. It may be a factor of funding too. So thank you.
Are there other questions, members? Yes, Councilman.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted just to respond to a remark you made, and I agree with stiffer penalties, and you made a wonderful remark, which is every time we have a law, especially really for me and for Memphis, we're dealing with commercial problem players, large, they're coming up, they're dumping, either they're in commercial rental business and they've done set outs, or they're dumping mattresses and tires. It's not nearly as much, and for my officers, they're very, very busy, very, very busy. And so it's, I guess the point that I want to make is we utilize our code enforcement to do most of that ticket writing. Our officers do have that ability. But the issue that you'd run into in a place like Memphis is that the large majority of people, even if the fine were $500, $5,000, or $5 million, can't afford to pay it. And so we end up in a circular problem, and they'll ultimately won't show up for their court. They'll be issued a bench warrant. And so that's a big problem that we have. So what I would ask is that if the legislature considers stiffening the penalties, that it would look at alternative strategies, much like utilizing inmates to help with cleanup or community service, alternatives to financial penalties, because ultimately for us, a large majority of our population shouldn't be littering. They do, but ultimately if they are served a ticket and a citation, the likelihood that they're going to show up and we're going to capture that revenue is slim to none at a high percentage. We see that oftentimes, which is why in the city of Memphis, I think after 8 years, all of your traffic tickets are just kind of walk away and disappear. There's an amnesty to them. So if the General Assembly would consider alternative strategies, or at least some guidance for the judiciary to consider, so that we can get the most out of those bad actors. But financial penalties for us seemingly are not very effective. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there other questions or comments? Director Lippard.
Just a quick aside. Ms. Berry also did our report on court fees and trouble in collecting court fees, so it all comes back around.
Yeah.
Well taken.
Our law does include community service hours, so not for the minimum offense, but I think beyond that, it's in there.
Well, but the fact, your recommendation for education for our law enforcement judges and district attorneys general, particularly maybe if we, it's been my experience, sometimes it was hard to get the local judge to put some of these folks into community service. Maybe education would help that. And because of some of my counties in my district, we've done that very successfully. But we really just had to go talk to them and kind of educate them a little bit. Other questions or comments? We certainly appreciate the discussion today and the comments from the members and the question, really good questions. And we appreciate your presentation. The chair will entertain a motion that we approve the final report for the comprehensive litter review. A motion from Senator Lundberg, second from Executive Huffman. Are there any debate? There being none, those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say nay. There are none. That passes unanimously. Thank you very, very much.
Thank
Ms.
you,
Berry.
members.
A good presentation. And I believe that concludes our meeting. Any other business?
Just a reminder that they can leave their books here.
I believe that concludes our business. I will remind you that you can just leave your books here if you like, and we'll start bright and early tomorrow morning at 8:30 because we've got actually, if you look at as you have the agenda, we have a very good panel scheduled for you. All right, thank y'all for coming.